year for the Jaguars. I think he will, and I'll tell you why in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jags, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up? I'm Tony Wiggins here with Locked On Jaguars, as I am every day, because it's your team every day. We're on the Locked On Podcast Network, and we thank you for making us your first listen here as we talk Jacksonville Jaguars. I want to get right into it. There's a lot of guys that need to step up for the Jacksonville Jaguars to take that next step. That next step is really the first step out of the hole, as we all know. And they have some people on the team that I believe are very, very capable of doing it. And I'll explain why I believe one guy, Andre Cisco, is ready to take that step forward. So there's a lot of layers as to why I believe he is ready to go. But before that, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. And as most of you guys know, or we all know, Cisco was drafted last year in the third round of the draft by the Jacksonville Jaguars in the 2021 draft. A lot was expected of him. There had been a lot of talk that he was presumed to be a potential first-round draft pick had he not had a knee injury at Syracuse. And as it turns out, he didn't appear to have any symptoms or any hangover from that knee injury the way he ran around on the football field in practice. For some reason, last year he did not play a lot, and we attribute most of that to Urban Meyer. But even when Urban Meyer was let go, Joe Cullen did not play Andre Cisco a ton. So that as a backdrop will lead us into why I believe he is going to be primed to have a good year, why he absolutely needs to if the Jaguars have really solved their safety issues and what it is that he brings to the table. I'll talk about in the second segment the scheme and what we can expect and maybe give some comps to Andre Cisco's impact from around the NFL. In the third and final segment, I'll tell you why I just have a gut feeling with the way he carried himself, with the way he's presented himself, with how he has walked around and really commanded the sort of attention and respect from not only members of the media, but his teammates. But first and foremost, they have to get that steady play from the safety position. They haven't had they had okay steady play with Tayshaun Gibson and Barry Church in 2017 and 18, but to really hit home as to what I think they need, it goes back to something I don't think that they've ever really had a pure safety guy. But because remember, even though Rasheed Mathis was drafted sort of a safety, he played most of his career corner. And you can go back to Marlon McCree and, of course, Donovan Darius. Those guys were different type of players than the league requires to have now at this safety position. Now the league is looking for that guy, whether you're playing split, quarters, halves, or single high. They need guys who can really play with a lot of range, can be sudden enough to overcome mistakes, can really diagnose a lot of the things that are going on in the modern day passing game. So it is critical. It is absolutely critical. When you look around at other teams, they have that, and you say, I want the Jaguars to have some of that. That's what you want. And I think it's also critical in the type of defense that they're going to play to be able to protect the back end of this defense. It always bothered me that they didn't give him more of a chance last year. And even when Andre Cisco did actually get on the field and get an opportunity to play, he always seemed to make something happen. He always seemed to be Johnny on the spot. He always seemed to jar a ball loose. He was the type of dude when you watch him play, it looked like he was going, a few miles per hour faster than anybody else. And he really just flashed on the screen. Any team could use it, but this team has to get that type of play, especially in the division that the Jaguars play in, where you got some teams that really want to ground and pound you in the Colts and the Titans. I don't know what the Texans want to do, but that's an ongoing joke between me and John Hickman and Cody. down with the Locked On Texans. But the thing is, you get sucked up into that run, and then all of a sudden, you get that one play over the top after the team has used up a whole bunch of clock and worn your front seven out, and all of a sudden they catch you slipping. The athletic prowess of certain players that play the safety position don't allow that to happen. They don't give up those big chunk plays in the middle. The game is more about now the safety being the quarterback of the defense as opposed to the Mike linebacker. So you need a player in those positions that has a very, very high IQ, a very good football IQ, but then they're also athletic and sudden. They can play the run, they can tackle, they can play the pass, and they're always that last line of defense. So that's what Andre Cisco was basically drafted to do. He never got a chance to do it last year. And like I said, I'm not going to put it all on Urban Meyer because when Urban Meyer left, Joe Cullen was still stingy with the minutes when it came to Andre Cisco. So now that we've discussed why Andre Cisco was drafted, what type of impact he's supposed to bring to a ball club, and why he didn't give that, I'm going to get to segment 3 when I talk to you about why I believe he'll change. But I'm going to give you some examples from the guys around the league, and we're going to do that here in segment 2. I'm going to give you some examples of guys around the league that play the position the way that I think Andre Cisco can play it. We'll do all of that in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars after I tell you guys about BetOnline.net. What is it? It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your betting needs. Find out all of your favorite sports and events at the number one online source for odds, lines, and games. Now, find reviews and news of every league, including baseball, which is off the chains right now. NFL, you're going to need that before the season starts for your fantasy drafts. NBA, they're still making trades. Combat sports, esports, and even golf. Of course, we saw what happened at St. Andrews just this past weekend. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information. From live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts, they have you covered. Head to the BetOnline website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action which is happening today, because BetOnline is where the game starts. And you guys start right here with me on Locked On Jaguars every single day. It's your team every day here. We are free on all platforms. Make sure you like and subscribe to the YouTube page and follow us wherever you get your podcast. I got to let you guys know, man, the MVP race, there are odds sponsored by BetOnline right now of who the most valuable player is going to be. And we put out a top 50, and you can check that out at Locked On NFL on our YouTube page and wherever you get your podcast, the Locked On NFL Countdown. You won't be disappointed, Jaguar fans, because there is someone on there that I'd say cracked the top. I'm not going to give it away. I was just say they've gone through about, I think, the top 20, so the bottom 20 of the 50 so far, and you ain't seen a Jaguar, so I'm thinking you're going to have a chance to see one here pretty soon. Now, the odds of the Jaguars defense being very good go up if you can get great play from a safety. The best chance of them getting that great play comes in the form of number 38, Andre Cisco. Why? What does he add to this team? When we think about teams like New Orleans that play really, really good defense, well, you have Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who's all over the place. And I know he's a slot guy mainly, and he sort of plays in the box a little bit. But Cisco will bring you that suddenness and that attack mode that you see with Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. Kevin Byard has the same thing, or Baird. He has the same thing over in Tennessee. I know we don't like to mention the Titans, but I just have to because it's the truth. He gives you a little bit of that same stuff where you almost feel like nothing is ever going to go bad as long as he's in the middle. If you go back to the Super Bowl, Jesse Bates, who, by the way, is trying to figure out how to get around the franchise tag, which he can't do this year. But Jesse Bates might play under the franchise tag this year. It just shows you the value of a guy who can make certain plays. If you think back to Bates, not only in the Super Bowl, but even in the playoffs leading up, Jesse Bates was all over the field for the Bengals. It's a big deal when you can get a guy like Andre Cisco to do those type things. In the last decade and a half, the number one guy you think about was Earl Thomas. Earl Thomas was the guy who has been the quintessential and would probably be a first ballot Hall of Famer if he wasn't around here acting back crazy, allegedly. But Earl Thomas is the guy that you think about when you think about free safety, when you think about patrolling the middle, when you want to talk about suddenness, the ability to tackle, and the ability to break up plays. I was talking about the Saints, like Malcolm Jenkins. Just to have someone at that deep level that is always that last line of defense is extremely important. And there are a number of examples of players around the league. You think about Antoine Winfield right down in Tampa, where Mike Caldwell was the defensive coordinator or the linebackers coach. He was on the staff last year. You think about guys like that, and you go, we haven't had one like that in a long time. We've had Jarrett Wilson. They've had Dewey running back there. The Jaguars have had so many different people attempting to man the deep middle of their defense. And quite frankly, that committee stuff doesn't really, really work. That's why everybody wanted to see Cisco so much last year, is because I said this earlier. I said this last week. I said the Jaguar fans, doesn't mean they want perfection right away, but they want to know that these positions are starting to be solidified. And once the positions are starting to be solidified, what'll happen is you'll start having faith that, okay, we finally got somebody we can grow with. Now he just has to improve. We still don't quite know, although it appears that the young man has really carried himself in a certain way that's going to allow us to start thinking that that's exactly what he is going to do. Now, Cisco isn't the biggest guy, but he's not small either. He's extremely physical with the way that he approaches it. So to try to pinpoint one guy who he plays very similar to is really hard. But if I had to guess, if I had to take a wild guess, and I know this is reaching a little bit, so I don't want people to start killing me for it. I mentioned Earl Thomas. I don't think he's Earl Thomas, but he does have some of the same traits and characteristics as Minkah. If I can say his name right, it's Minkah Fitzpatrick, who plays in Pittsburgh, who's a Pro Bowl, all-pro type. He's not quite as big. I think Minkah is a 6'1", 215-pound guy, but the impact is the same because he can cover. He can tackle in the box. He covers like a corner. He's extremely sudden. He's always around the football. He's always around tip balls. He seems to be always to be Johnny on the spot, and he makes you very, very secure with the deep middle of your field that he's always going to be able to cover ground and make sure that you don't give up chunk plays and touchdowns. So if there's one guy, that's him. Maybe if you want to go a little bit older, you can think of a guy like Devin McCourty, who it seems like he's been a Patriot since I was in elementary school, even though he hasn't been in that long. But he's another guy who's just a consummate professional that protects the back end with speed, with sure tackling, and it just makes you hungry if you're a Jaguar fan that's the type of guy you need to have. So it's going to be interesting to see how Mike Caldwell uses him, how Mike Caldwell actually employs his resources when it comes to whether or not they're going to split off and he's going to have Jenkins on one side or Rashawn Jenkins, or if they're going to continue to play Dewey, or if Mike Thomas can make a little bit of inroads, or one of those rookies. They took two rookies late in the 7th round, and they seem to like their versatility a lot. So it all really comes down, though, to me, it has this feeling that this ball club is leaning on Andre Cisco a little bit. I'm going to tell you exactly why I think this is a big – y'all want to call him Andre the Giant so bad, but I got to wait until he starts doing giant things. I'm going to tell you why in just a second. Some little things that I've noticed that makes me believe that they have bigger plans for him than the previous administration, and I'll do it in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars. All right, man, we're going to roll along here in the third and final segment of the day. We're talking Andre Cisco and his giant impact, Andre the Giant, if you will, his impact on the Jacksonville Jaguars this year. I've given you some names from around the league, guys that impact the game, guys that their team probably couldn't live without and would totally change the way their defense is played. We talked about Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. We talked about the retired Malcolm Jenkins. Of course, we mentioned also the retired Earl Thomas, but modern day guys that are playing right now, we talk about Minkah Fitzpatrick and Devin McCourty, who, of course, He's about 47 years old, but still. And by the way, shout out to the other McCourty brother who retired the other day. Shout out to him too, since we're talking about safeties. This was one of the things that I wanted to talk about safeties for, because when one of the McCourty twins retired and the other was still playing, I was like, the Patriots have not had to worry about free safety for a long, long time. And some teams have really found the value or know the value in having someone who can man the middle of the field. We were talking about New Orleans earlier. Malcolm Jenkins retired. They go out and get Tyrann Mathieu. They really, Dennis Allen, by the way, is the defensive coordinator, well, now the head coach of the Saints, is a defensive backs coach by trade. So he understands what that deep middle of that field it means in the National Football League. So those guys have a certain swag about them. There's a certain gait. There's a certain way that they walk around and they command some respect. I've seen that in Andre Cisco. So it doesn't mean a whole bunch when we had our draft at our technical partner, First Coast News here, where I work as an analyst. We had our pre-draft or our draft night party. Of course, the Jags picked first, and then they came back and had the 27th pick. But one of the people that the PR department had walking around doing interviews, we actually did an Andre Cisco interview with our technical partner at First Coast News. Teams don't do that. They ask the coach, who do you want us to put out here and talk? The only people that they'll have out there doing that are folks that they have a plan for. So I don't know if it was Trent Baalke who picked Cisco last year. We attribute it to the relationship aspect of having Chris Ash on staff, who recruited Andre Cisco when Andre Cisco came out of high school. This very well could be a Trent Baalke pick because of those athletic traits and because of the value. We saw him again go for value again this year with Chad Muma. Urban Meyer may not have had as big a deal on that draft as everyone seems to think, especially if all of these guys start panning out. So we'll just have to see. But the Jaguars PR, the first guy we interviewed on draft night was Andre Cisco. He was one of the guys walking around at the draft party. Teams generally don't do that if they don't have a plan for those players. Andre has a big following also on social media. There was a viral video of him working out with Michael Parsons and some other people where he raced. And some people said Michael Parsons won, but some people say Andre Cisco in the red beat Michael Parsons along with beating everybody else in that little short race that they did inside of an indoor facility. And that doesn't mean that much because Michael Parsons is 250 pounds, but what it does mean, it shows that Andre is working out. He's athletic. He's working out around a bunch of other guys that have the accolades and that have done extremely well for themselves their first year. I also noticed something different at practice. And I look at body language. I watch who the alpha seems to be and who folks seem to gravitate towards and who has that extra pep in their step at the OTAs. And folks, I'm going to tell you something. Andre Cisco ran around on that field the way guys like Rasheed Mathis and Jalen Ramsey did before. He ran around and he carried himself as if he was the pure alpha of that group. Now, does this all mean that it's going to come together on the football field? Not necessarily, but I do believe with better coaching, which I'm sure they have this year, with an emphasis on the importance of having a young guy like Andre Cisco run around in the secondary and really exert himself and show that athleticism that led people to think that he was going to be a first-round pick. I honestly believe, just from watching how he moves, how he carries himself, and him being 2 years away from a knee injury, I think this is the breakout year. Now, I know you guys are saying, Wig, you have been incredibly optimistic about this team in every single podcast that you do. But let me tell you what this is. This is not me. This is not clickbait. This is not any of that stuff. What this means to me is I'm trying to give the fans something realistic to look forward to and something where I'm being subjective and objective, but I'm just telling you my true thoughts. And I'm going to give you the best side of it before training camp. And one of those things that's the best side of all of this is this. He looks and walks and acts like a guy who thinks he's pretty good. And that might be half the battle before the game start, that you have to actually think that you're a pretty good football player. And that is exactly how he moves and how he's acting. It has to translate to the football field. But I have no doubt that Mike Caldwell is going to be able to embrace and be able to extract the best out of Andre Cisco in what is going to be his second year. The second-year guy out of Syracuse did not get off to the start he probably wanted last year. And the fans were clamoring for him. They were like, we need to play Cisco. We need to get this kid on the field to see what he can do, to see what he has. Andre Cisco even said he didn't know why the hell he wasn't playing. He said he's ready to go. He was chomping at the bit to get on the field, and they wouldn't put him on the field. So this year, you get it. Now, there's this train of thought last year, like, can you put him out there even though you know he might not be ready, or maybe they saw something on the eye in the sky, and maybe they noticed that he was a hair off here or a hair off there. I've always been the type to say put the talent on the field. And Richie Pettibone, the longtime Washington defensive coordinator under Joe Gibbs, said this about the great Wilbur Marshall. Half the time Wilbur was going in the wrong direction, but he was so good and so fast, he made up for the mistake really quickly, and he got there and made the play anyway. I kind of subscribe to that, because if the guys you had last year on the field were just going to be giving up stuff anyway, at least put the kid out there to see what he can do. If mistakes going to be made, let him make the mistakes, but then be able to overcome those mistakes and learn from those mistakes, and be able to get out here and show what he can do. We haven't seen that yet, and that's why it's a big question. But the good news is, and I always give you the good news. The good news is he appears to be a guy that's ready to pop and bust out for the Jacksonville Jaguars and this new coaching staff, and he is really, really going to need it. What you need to do also is tune into the Locked On NFL podcast. I did a solo podcast this week because James Rapine is on vacation, but normally James Rapine and I do the show on every Wednesday. But Monday through Friday, you have great guests: Alex Clancy, Tyler Rowland, your boy Q, Carter Critiques. You have guys all week that are really, really laying it down for you, giving you Luke Braun. I don't want to forget about Lucas Braun. Ross Jackson, I believe, still is on it. But you get a smorgasbord or a buffet of guys from around the Locked On NFL Network, and they give you the national shows. This week, I actually talked about why small market teams get hurt in their quest to get their guys into the Hall of Fame. And we're saying this as Tony Boselli is a couple of weeks shy of going in. And not only the Boselli going in, we need to get Fred Taylor and Jimmy Smith their due consideration for those awards also. And I talked about how small market teams hurt, but they shouldn't, because football is so global and we have so much content that everyone ought to be able to recognize these days how good these guys are or were, and give them their just due for their career. So make sure you check that out wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you like and subscribe to Locked On NFL Podcast, and tune in every single day, making us your first listen. They can be your second or your next listen, but your first listen is always here on Locked On Jaguars. Think about it. Andre Cisco, if he can give a giant effort, we'll start calling him Andre the Giant, as long as there's no copyright against that. And or come up with the Cisco Kid or something. Come up with a real good name for him and put a section in the stadium for him so we can egg him on so he can make some plays. You guys make sure you take care of each other and tune in every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network on Locked On Jaguars. I am your host, Tony Wiggins. Thank you again for joining us. And please join us tomorrow as we continue our coverage leading up to the start of training camp that's coming on the 24th for the Jacksonville Jaguars.